Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Stories of Strange Creatures, Volume 1, Story 1. This is pretty freaky. I still don't know how to explain it. About 2 years ago, my sister, my infant nephew, and I moved into an apartment that we later discovered was used as an elderly community. From the moment we moved in, we felt uneasy. The weird feeling wasn't enough to get us to ditch our seemingly awesome apartment, though, especially not a cheap two-bedroom that allowed dogs and had a pool. A few months after moving in, weird stuff started happening. Shadows moving in an otherwise still room, objects not being where they had been left, baby toys talking to themselves in dark rooms. Just the kind of thing to make your skin crawl. To make matters worse, even when it was bloody hot outside, my bedroom would be freezing, and the closet door was always broke in an open position. It didn't matter how often we would get it fixed, it would instantly be broken again. Now, this is where it gets a little crazy. One morning, I woke and my bed had been moved. I hadn't even as much as wrinkled my sheets while sleeping, yet my bed had been slid 3 feet away from the wall. I then began having pretty intense night terrors. I jump out of bed screaming and throwing my blanket, begging for my sister to save me. This would happen 3 times a night. One night, I had a particularly vivid night terror, only I didn't feel frightened. I jumped up in bed, looked around, and saw eyes peering around my broken closet door. I leaned in and saw a man, mid-20s, staring back at me. I said in the calmest voice I could muster, "I'm going to give you a few minutes alone, but then you need to leave." I stumbled to the living room and sat on the couch for 10 minutes, then walked back to my bed. From that moment on, no more baby toys talked. My closet door closed with ease, and my bedroom was normal temperature. Story number 2. When I was 13 or 14, I lived in Hawaii on a military base along the side of a volcanic crater. AMR for those who know the area. The townhomes we lived in were up along the slope of the mountain, but the last 500 feet or so were empty hill space, leading to a cliff overlooking the crater, which had business and such in it long dormant. Well, anyway, my friends and I, being the young teenagers we were, loved hiking the side of the crater and walking along the edge. It was mostly flat leading up to the edge, and there was a fence almost most of it, so this isn't as unsafe as it sounds. We found an abandoned bunker, most likely from World War II, about a mile along the side of the hill, and decided to go exploring. We got inside and it was mostly empty. There was a mount for what I would assume would have been a machine gun at some point, and then there was a locked metal door. It was pretty rusty and sounded kind of hollow, like there were a few spots you could probably see through, except for the fact that it was pitch black inside. We'd go out to this bunker and kind of hang out and play all the time, until the last time we went. We got there around 5 p.m., and we were sitting around talking about random things, probably Animal Crossing or Phantasy Star Online at the time. All of a sudden, we start hearing this faint banging noise coming from behind the door. We froze and got super silent, and the banging was rhythmically speeding up. Like, at first it would be a slight bang every 15 seconds or so, then after about 20 faint bangs, they would be 10 seconds apart, etc. It got to the point where they were about 5 seconds apart, and then they stopped altogether. We looked at the door and noticed some of the rust powder had fallen off the door. We got up to get out of there and started climbing the ladder out. And the person that left last, there were 3 of us and I was second, so the person climbing behind me swore they heard a loud bang against the door as he finished climbing out. We ran down the hill, and some MPs spotted us and told us we weren't allowed to be up there, and about 2 weeks later they had built a fence and sectioned off the entire area. Still no effing clue what was down there, if anything. Story number 3. I used to live in Arizona, near mountains sacred to the Native American tribes in the area of Pima and Maricopa. There were a lot of skinwalker rumors in the area. My friends and I loved camping, and we were lucky enough to get permission to use a site near the mountain along the Salt River for a weekend. First thing you have to understand is that we were a pretty sheltered group of kids. Didn't use drugs and alcohol in moderation. We mostly went out to share creepy stories around the campfire and nerd out for a night or two. We all spent a lot of time in the desert, and we're all familiar with the land and wildlife, even the rarer species. We were sitting around our fire listening to the river and the animal sounds around us, crickets, cicadas, birds. The moon was almost full, and the desert was beautiful. Suddenly, everything goes quiet. Just the sound of the river remains, and even that seems spooky. The air grew still and seemed to get cold. We heard rustling in the undergrowth across from our fire. Out steps a javelina. Javelinas are in the pig family, usually a brownish color, biggest one about the size of a medium-sized dog. They're actually kind of cute. This one wasn't. It was huge and looked jet black with glowing eyes. Red eyes, that is. It paced around a bit, seemed like it was moving around the fire so it could look each one of us in the eye. I've never seen anything look at me like that, and I work with psych patients. Its gaze was cold and searching, like it could see through me. After what felt like forever, it finally backed up through the undergrowth. The night got warmer, and the normal sounds started up again. We spent the rest of the night very close to the fires, and got the hell out of there as soon as the sun rose. I really wanted to believe it was just a male javelina scoping out some territory, but every instinct I have says it wasn't. Next story. There was this guy I used to work with called Dan. Dan was a chill guy who everyone got on with, but a little bit weird at times. He used to believe in a lot of things: aliens, ghosts, government experiments, the lot. He wasn't religious, but that's besides the point. Anyway, while messing around at work, he's explaining stupid things to us about how he's seen spaceships and how all this paranormal stuff happens when he's at home. Some of it is quite ridiculous, but I listened anyway. A couple of weeks later, he invited me around for a few beers. I was driving, so I couldn't really drink, but I still went over. We got onto the subject of ghosts, and he starts explaining things to me like how he was once eating an apple and it exploded just as he went to take a bite. I laughed it off and thought it could have been some sort of pressure or the way he was holding it to cause it to explode. He was deadly serious about this. He pulled out a few pictures of this apple and started showing me the damage it had done to him. There was a picture of him with a cut on his cheek caused by this apple. However, I was still not convinced of this ghost he had in his house. He was not messing around. He said, "Hold on, actually, I'll show you." He pulled out the shoebox full of pictures from around the house. He says, "Just flick through those, you'll see." I sighed and said, "Okay." I'm going through these photos of a recent Christmas. The usual photos: kids opening presents, the family having Christmas dinner, having a few drinks at night, a group shot, and I stopped. This was the photo that left me in awe. His family was standing in front of this mirror, and I shit you not, in the reflection of the mirror was an Edwardian girl, smiling straight at the camera. This was not one of those could be a smudge type of things. It was not a hidden behind someone can barely make it out type of thing either. This was a clear colored taken photograph with the girl's reflection being black and white. You can make out her face, her smile, her clothes, her hands, everything. It doesn't end there though. Dan says to me, "I told you I wasn't shitting you." I go to the next photo. Same sort of thing, family members have moved around, and so has the girl. She's doing a different pose. She's smiling, showing her teeth. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was this black and white girl standing right in the mirror smiling at me, like she'd be there the whole time. I felt like someone had thrown a bucket of ice cold water over me, like I was being watched, like I wasn't welcome anymore, and I felt like I needed to leave. I put the photos back in the box and not long after left. I still don't believe in ghosts, aliens, or anything in that matter, but I know what I saw, and I know it scared the poop right out of me. Next story. Okay, so this is a true story that scared me very badly in a big bad way. Back when we were 18, I had a mate who reckoned he was getting haunted or stalked by this menacing black figure. I was kind of dubious at the beginning. So one night, I'm sleeping over in his parents' big old wooden mansion. He gives me his parents' bed for the night. It was a perfect storm of creepiness. His stepmother had a massive porcelain doll collection facing the bed, and I hate them. The family dog was an old Aussie sheepdog, but with full cloudy white cataracts covering his eyes, so he looked freaky. Old house, porcelain dolls, blind dog with white clouded eyes. Perfect. So, after midnight sometime, I wake up in his parents' bed, And there's this cold wind blowing through the open door in a closed house. Also, I got a feeling of intense terror. To top it all, the dog is hiding under the bed and crying. The dog is my proof it wasn't just a nightmare. Then a big black robed figure coasts in through the door and hovers over the four-poster bed, about 8 feet tall, menacing, temperatures icy cold, scared me tremendously. Hovered for a few minutes while I tried to wake up fully, but unfortunately I am awake. Then I lie there dead, still too scared to move while the dog whines under the bed. I'm too scared to check on the dog because if it stares at me with those blind, cloudy white eyes, I'll die. The dog was definitely scared. It stayed under the bed whimpering. Once I gathered the courage, I went to my friend's room and told him what happened. He calmly answered, "Now you know what I go through every night." He rolled over and went back to sleep. Forget that man. He eventually got the church to do an exorcism, which apparently worked. That's my story. And it is true. Next story. This past year in college, we had a ghost named Gideon living in our dorm that has followed my roommate from place to place, or so he claims. He dubbed the ghost Gideon. He would hear his name, have his bed being shaken in the middle of the night, stuff like that. He wasn't the only one to experience it. As the school year went on, Gideon began to get comfortable with all of us, and activity began to be frequent. When alone, I've heard faucets running, looking about and finding nobody to be in the dorm apartment. I've heard knocking on my door, and when I open it, nobody would be there. I'd hear knocking on my door, quick little raps of about 3 to 5 knocks every time I'm alone in the dorm apartment with my bedroom door closed. Every once in a while, late in the night, I'll hear a loud slap on my door or on my wall. I have a metal water bottle I keep on my windowsill, and one night it sounded as though someone was just picking it up and setting it down softly, just enough so there would be a metallic clinking on the sill, which happened to be made of concrete or something. I heard a noise as though someone had fallen off my desk. When I woke up, my chapstick was on the floor beside my bed that had originally been standing up in the middle of my desk. I heard it drop to the floor beside my bed, but my windows were closed and my fan was off, so I don't know how I could have gotten there. Something handed my pillow to me. I woke up sometime in the night to find it wasn't on the bed, reached out groggily, and it was suddenly in my hand. Something had tried unlocking my roommate's door from the outside. He found little scratches from where the door meets the frame, and the catch in the door was scratched as well. I had a guest spending the night, and they saw some strange shadow moving on my ceiling. We tried to recreate the shadow, but couldn't. The shades were down, so there wasn't too much light coming in. My roommate was alone and saw somebody out of the corner of his eye walk past his room. Doesn't sound weird, but the figure is walking towards the wall. There's just windows, and there's nothing there other than a couch. When he left his room to see what it was, there was nobody there, and nobody could have gone anywhere, being that we were on the 5th floor. My other roommate, the one that brought Gideon with him one afternoon, of course, when alone, saw a shadow figure walk into one of the bathrooms. One night I experienced a loud knock on my door. I said, "Yeah?" Got up and opened my door. There was, of course, nobody there, and at the same time as I opened my door, my roommate across from me opened his door, claiming somebody knocked on his door. He thought it was me. I thought it was him. We had our doors locked at the same exact time. I never felt Gideon was a bad presence, just kind of there and doing his thing. There was never anything bad that happened to any of us having him there, other than an eerie feeling being alone in the place as though you weren't entirely alone. Next story. I'm from the Louisville, Kentucky area. Anyone who's big into paranormal activity is probably aware of a place called the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. It's an old tuberculosis hospital that has had a lot of people die in it. Want some history on it? Here it is. Well, anyway, I did security slash tour caboose video work for them for about 2 years, from about 2005 to 2007. Now, I will say that before I did this, I did not believe in ghosts, spirits, what have you. Didn't seem possible, but after working, volunteering there, I left fully convinced. Too many experiences to count, but I'll list the ones that got me the most. One morning, after an overnight tour, people paid $100 to be allowed to roam free in the building and ghost hunt for 8 hours. Another security guard and myself were walking through the building, locking all doors and such, so we could go home. I was walking down the hallway when suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something or someone run. That was freaky. What really scared the poop out of me was The fact that I also heard bare feet slap the ground as they ran. We took off after them and should have cornered them, but there was nothing there. Did not anybody ever watch Celebrity Paranormal Project? Well, they came and filmed there. Gary Busey, Hal Sparks, and some other celebrities. I didn't know what they were there for that episode. I will tell you this, VH1 rigged the hell out of this place. Most of the stuff that happened on this episode didn't really happen. I won't mention what as not to spoil anything, but still. What was real was this. After a long 12-hour day of myself PAing on set, I stayed behind to do security. 3 crew members came after hours to check the place out, and I think it was the camera rigging guy that I took. We went into the building on the 3rd floor and sat in the middle of the hallway. We sat there for a while. I'll never forget it. As we're sitting there, I'm looking one way and he's looking the other. Now, I will mention that in this building there are 5 floors, with electricity only running to 2 of them, with the exception of exit signs, fire codes and such. While I'm looking down the hallway, suddenly the last room I can see starts to light up from inside. I instantly get up and begin to walk over there. The light in the room was hovering as if somebody had a flashlight and was waving it around. I got about 10 feet from the door and it shut off. So I ran in there, and there was nothing. I looked out the window to make sure no one was playing some type of trick on me. So, there's nothing. Totally unexplainable. And I called over the other guard, just for him to look out and make sure no one was there either. And here we are on the 5th floor. No one, nothing. But the one thing to this day that gets me the most is something that I actually got proof of. One night, me and another security guard were wrapping up a half-night tour, like the full-night tour, but only $50 and 4 hours, and as we're walking onto the 2nd floor, the guard stopped me. We looked down the hallway and saw the interior or exterior doors were wide open. These doors were installed after the current owners bought the place. They are big, heavy doors that lock, and you can't unlock them from the outside without a key. Anyway, the other security guard swore up and down he saw a tall, dark figure walk out of the door, but I didn't. After a little debate, we decided that maybe it was another security guard, and we didn't want to lock him out. So we left the doors open. A few days pass, and while I'm there, I hear 2 other security guards talking about something they witnessed. When I spoke with them, they told me the same story, but both of them saw the tall, dark figure and went running after it. That's the moment when I suddenly realized that there was a motion detection camera on the door. So I had the computer to see what I could find. What I saw was crazy. This door that is shut out of nowhere just suddenly swings open by itself. There was no one around. Time code on the camera showed how the camera would kick on when it detected motion, like for a moth or other bugs. The door swung open and no one was there. 4 hours passed and the next thing on the camera was the guards running out of the door. Yes, I can never explain any of those events. Next story. I saw a dead guy walking around casually. I graduated high school and lived in the same town while I went to college. A couple of years after graduation, I was stopped at a light and a guy was crossing the street. I recognized him as Chris. One of my good friends had dated him, and we hung out a few times. He looked pretty pale, like he was on drugs. It didn't really surprise me, as that seemed like where he may have been heading back in high school. Whatever, no big deal. A couple of years after that, I started hanging out with another girl from the high school, and we mentioned seeing people from around town from our graduating class. I mentioned seeing Chris. She gave me a blank look and said, "You saw who?" I confirmed, "Chris Jones, short, dirty blonde hair, kind of tall, skinny guy." She paused and said, "He died the summer we graduated." I was like, "Wait, what? No way." She explained that he went to the local lake, was doing drugs, fell off the boat, and he drowned. I later asked my other friend who had dated him in high school if this was true. She confirmed. The guy I saw casually crossing the street was apparently a dead guy. Next story. I lived in a haunted house that my dad finally admitted was messed up. When I was little, my parents divorced and I went to live with my dad as he was moving to a new town. We ended up buying this big house out in the country outside of a little podunk town. This house was huge for the 2 of us, but it was right on a little pond with an island, so it was cool. There were other houses around it, but it was basically surrounded by cornfields, which scared the F out of me because the movie Children of the Corn had just come out. That movie terrifies me to this day, and I am old as you know what. Anyway, Freaky stuff started happening almost immediately after we moved in. On Halloween, my dad and I bought this huge pumpkin, carved it, and put it in the front window. We went out of town one night, and when we came back, it was smashed in the middle of the living room, 10 feet from where it was sitting. I didn't think much of it because my dad played it off, but I heard him on the phone with his new girlfriend later that night saying how freaky it was. He moved on pretty quick after Mom. Straight player. Weird and random noises happened pretty much every night, and we just grew used to it. Even voices started, but my dad always told me it was the house settling. I've never heard a house say the name Jeffrey when it settles. That was when I would always hear someone calling out. But then there are two messed up instances that happened that scared us into selling the place. Even years later, my dad still talks about how it freaked him out. First, it was one night that we had a really bad storm. I was 10 or so. My dad was done letting me crawl into bed with him anymore. I had to brave that out on my own. Anyway, at about 3 in the morning, as this storm has been raging on for a couple of hours, we hear this loud as heck boom from the first floor. Both of our rooms were on the second, and then we hear glass shattering. My dad yells at me to stay upstairs and he goes down to investigate. Came back up 20 minutes later and tells me to go to sleep. Turns out our bay window had been blown out during the storm. The freaky thing was all the glass was outside the house, not a shard in the room. He got it fixed the next day and never mentioned it again. Second, we had a pull-down attic that was in the hallway between my bedroom and the bathroom. One night, I wake up to go to the bathroom. As I was walking down the hall, I run into the hanging attic door. My dad was sound asleep in his room, so it freaked me out. However, as I was walking back to my room, I run into the attic door again. I heard some rustling going on up there and figured Dad was up there, so I walked past the attic towards his room, but he was in there snoring. I freaked out and told my dad. He got up, turned on his bedroom light, still angry at me. We both looked into the hall, and even though the hallway light was off, we could tell the attic was now closed. My dad was pissed, told me to go to bed and turn to the light. To this day, I still turn on every goddamn light upstairs of my current house when I have to pee, much to the dismay of my wife. We moved soon after that, and I've never gone back to that place. Next story. My husband and I for a time slept in separate rooms. He would often come into the room I was in the morning to get clothes or socks. I would be aware that he was in the room, but just ignored it because I didn't wake up. Then a few times it seems like he was just standing there. I woke up to the awareness of someone standing there. Of course, it had to be my husband. It pissed me off mildly, but I dozed back off. No big deal. After one particular episode, I was very upset because my husband had apparently been standing there for some time, and I thought he was supposed to be at work already. I opened my eyes and there was a man at the end of the bed. I literally screamed and jumped up, but just like that he was gone. I confronted my husband about a lot of those times. I thought it was him, and it turns out it wasn't him. I ended up divorcing for many reasons, but the man still stuck around. I don't really get a sense of malevolence or even that it was sleep paralysis because I could wake up and could control my body. Parents, you know when you're asleep and your kid comes into your room wanting something, and you know they're there before opening your eyes? It's exactly like that. I've sat up, opened my eyes many, many times expecting to see one of my kids, only to see a man. It's the same man every single time. Tall, slim, dark hair, kind of an impish look to him. He's actually quite handsome. His features are quite pleasant, smiling mildly. Over the years, he's scared the poop out of me, though. If this is a recurrent dream, it sucks. I've noted that he's been slowly moving from the end of my bed up to the near side near my head. There's nothing like opening your eyes and looking right beside your head expecting to see a 5-year-old child and then seeing a pair of legs that go up and you see this man looming over you and having that vision survive even for a flash after switching the light on. I swear I'm going to have a heart attack one day. The last time I saw him, it did something I'd never seen him do before. He was right near the head of the bed again, but this time when I opened my eyes, it was like he'd been waiting for me and he leaned his face in until it was literally eye to eye with me. He had a huge grin on his face, and his face was maybe 6 inches away from my face. I screamed and scurried away, turned on all the lights. It was terrifying. Again, I don't get any sense of malevolence, but being a single woman alone, it's very much a sense of, why is there a man in my house, and where's my machete? I don't know if it means anything or makes any difference, but I've actually sat there and talked, especially after the last time, and said That if anyone wants my attention, that's okay, but this is not the way to do it. You're scaring me. I hadn't really had scary problems since, and I've gone around 6 months without any incidents since then. The thing is, too, my grandmother apparently had a man as well. Not quite the same way, but she wasn't someone to lie or over dramatize things, and she'd seen this man watching her in broad daylight in her home. Similar thing. Thought it was an intruder, didn't question it until he was gone. I wish he was alive so I could ask her more. I do remember something similar happening as a kid, but I remember it being more about a benign and positive experience. I would have someone sleep with me in my bed only to find there was nobody there. It felt like someone was. I just thought my stuffies came alive at night or something because I was a kid. I'm trying to choose to think of it as some sort of benign and possibly hereditary guardian, if any of this stuff is real. I've had some terrible, terrible things happen to me in my life, and a consistent theme in my dreams and my sleep is me feeling completely loved. And I wake up feeling loved even when nobody in my life really loves me. I don't know if I believe any of this stuff, but if there's anything that does that for me, I am forever grateful. Either that or my brain is really, really good at fulfilling my subconscious needs in my sleep, in which case, thank you, brain. Next story. This is a brief account of an experience I had almost a year ago in the warehouse where I work alone. No one I've ever told has believed me, but perhaps you will. I work in a warehouse that my father purchased. He bought it for 25% of its cost from a farmer who seemed very excited to be rid of it. It's in the middle of Mennonite country, with no neighbors for a half-mile around. Look out the window, you see cornfields and scraggly trees. Cell service? Forget about it. I work here alone, painting and preparing the front office portion for eventual functionality. To get to the front office, you must go through a hallway from the main warehouse into a secondary office and then through another door into the front. I frequently hear bumps and thuds and occasionally will go into the warehouse and fear air movement, but I've always attributed it to drafts and animal life in the roof. The only thing that has ever made me uneasy about the building is the fact that all the doors locks are reversed. Whoever installed those locks didn't intend to keep people out. They intended to keep something in. It never really got too freaky until one day. I was in the front office when I began to hear thudding. I ignored it and continued to apply masking tape to the door I was working on. But this time it was accompanied by a screeching sound. Not loud, but audible. I was freaked out, but convinced myself that it was a pissed off raccoon or squirrel that had found its way inside. I continued working until I heard the slam. The door to the secondary office had been opened. It sounded like it had been violently slammed shut. I peeked around the corner and saw that I was right. The secondary door was now closed. Tried to logic it through in my head that a strong draft had sucked it closed, although I knew there was no such draft. The thudding began again. Closed this time. I've never been able to put a proximity on it, but now it sounded like it was right on the other side of the door. I froze, unsure of what was happening. My eyes locked on the door handle, which began to turn. The door disengaged its latch and slowly swung open. Wider, wider. Nothing there. Nothing visible, no air movement, just quiet. So quiet. A quiet that seemed to overwhelm me with its presence. A quiet so thick I couldn't breathe. The quiet was shattered when the screech came again. This time it was clearly human. Pained, anger, and emanating from the main warehouse. The door slammed. That entirely broke my frozen, fearful state. I ran. I got into my car and drove until I was in cell range to call my father. He didn't believe anything about the doors closing, but agreed that the building had something weird about it. He told me he'd be right out. Fast forward half an hour. My dad and I met up and drove back to the warehouse. I showed him the door that slammed, showing him that it was separated from both the front office and the main warehouse, so no draft could have closed it. I told him about the thuds, the screeching, and the sudden quiet that overcame the building. He decided that we should check the main warehouse. Emboldened by his presence, I led the way. Something you should know about this warehouse. It was formerly a furniture manufacturing place owned by a Mennonite farmer. They made handmade chairs, tables, etc. Because of all the cutting that went on, the floor is thickly coated with dust. We walked into the warehouse and saw nothing out of the ordinary. The dust was untouched, the doors were closed, windows were locked. The only thing out of the ordinary was one of the hanging fluorescent light fixtures. It was hanging askew and swaying slightly. Insisting we take a look at the mount to ensure it didn't just break loose, My dad grabbed a stepladder. He supported while I climbed up and grabbed the swinging light. I looked on top of the light and saw a handprint. A single fresh, inhumanly large handprint. No footprints in the dust around the light. No signs of a presence. I climbed down and switched places with my father. He saw it and said, "What the hell? There's been no one in here for years." He climbed down and told me he'd been suspicious of someone breaking in and stealing parts from the warehouse light system. He couldn't believe me that this wasn't human, that something wasn't right here. The last thing he said was, "Nothing is here. Next time, just go back to work." And then, as if to show its presence, the thud returned. This time it wasn't just a thud, but more of an earthquake. The entire building felt like it was moving. The heartbeat-like thud was then overlaid by the screech. The awful, awful screech. It felt like it was coming from the walls themselves. We ran. We ran, and I haven't returned. My father hired someone to finish my job, and has since moved into the office. He's heard the thudding, but thus far nothing has happened further. What actually happened? I don't know. Nor do I ever care to know. What I do know is there is something paranormal in that building, and the man who sold it to us knew it. I'll never forget the sound of that lock turning by itself, or the feeling of that thunderous silence. Next story. Before I was born, my grandfather's brother was killed in a plane accident while training during World War II. The plane crashed in Montana. About 50-some years after the accident, my grandfather wanted to create some sort of book about his brother. Pieced some things together, gathered things from his childhood and before his passing. Eventually he took a trip to Montana to visit the crash site. He found it. I think at that point it was some guy's farm, but a crater was still in the ground from the impact. Piece of the plane everywhere. He brought a piece back for me, which I still have. I don't know how long he spent there, but at one point he asked the guy who owned the property if there was anything else. The guy told him no, and my grandfather asked if it was okay if he explored the property a little more. The owner was fine with this. From what my grandfather told me, he walked up some hill, looked around, and as he turned around to walk back to the crash site, he noticed something stuck in the ground. Knelt down, and his brother's dog tag was sitting right there. He wears it all the time now. What do you think would be the odds on that? Next story. I've been waiting for some time to tell my story. Let me tell you, keeping this to myself has been a special kind of hell. If I ever tell this to an actual person, they would undoubtedly call me crazy or schizophrenic or something. Maybe talking about it now will help to set it straight in my head. Perhaps you can help me out with a reasonable explanation I'm just not seeing. A little background context. When my sister was in utero, she was originally part of a set of twins, but swallowed up her twin as the pregnancy went on. It's called a vanishing twin. This will later become relevant to the story, so bear with me. My sister, let's call her M for the purpose of simplifying the story, has always had trouble with sleepwalking. My mom had her examined by several specialists. It's that bad. They've only eased the problem temporarily. However, she sleepwalks on average about 10 times a month. The time this story took place, about a month ago or so, I was home from college for the weekend. I often stay up late at nights and decided to relax a little and watch some series before going to bed. It was about 1 a.m., I'd say. I was lying on my side watching my show with headphones on. I could see the hallway in my peripheral vision. When I next looked up, I suddenly noticed my sister standing in the doorway. Her eyes were half closed. She looked like she was sleepwalking. I took my headphones off and saw her slowly walking towards me. When she got close, I felt my stomach clench and got the most intense feeling of dread I've ever experienced. She didn't look like my sister. Every facial feature was slightly off. The way an identical twin doesn't completely resemble the other twin. What gave it away weren't her physical features, though. It was her expression. She had this smile on her face, is what I'd guess you'd call it, since the corners of her mouth were turned upward. It didn't look like any smile I'd ever seen, though. It somehow encompassed every awful, evil feeling I've ever experienced, read about, and imagined feeling. Made me think she was going to start screaming at any moment and never stop. Every single hair in my head was raised. She was just staring at me. I noticed dimly that her eyes were wide open now. She didn't look like she was sleepwalking anymore. Eventually, I managed to say her name in an attempt to get a response out of her. She then stopped smiling and said, "No, I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Annie." I think I was actually paralyzed with fear when I heard that. Somehow, eventually, I managed to scream and shove her away. My parents came crashing into my room. They thought someone had broken into the house. When they turned on the light, I knew it was M standing next to me again. Her face looked completely normal again. She was awake at this point. She blinked a bit and said she couldn't remember coming to my room. The reason I was so freaked out, a few years ago my mom told me about the fact that M absorbed her twin in utero, but she also told me that she had kind of morbidly considered what she would have liked to call her second daughter. She told me she would have called her Annie. Next story. I work in a restaurant, and one afternoon about 3 p.m. when it's really slow, I'd gotten an order and needed to go into the walk-in cooler to get something to make it, and as I walked around the line and looked down the hall at the walk-in door, I saw a tall figure with a white t-shirt, gray cloth shorts like gym shorts, and dark tennis shoes walking into it, and the door closed behind him. I thought it was a bartender who worked there at the time because he was a tall, slimish guy and figured he was grabbing beer to stock the bar before the dinner shift. I opened the door and reached for what I needed and turned towards where the beer was to say something to him, and nobody was there. Looked the other way, nothing. I thought it was really weird. Grabbed what I needed and went out and finished my day. It wasn't until the next day when I thought about it and I realized I could have been in that walk-in cooler with an apparition. The door was the only way in and out, and I remember seeing the figure so clearly to be able to describe him. I tried to get my GM to look at the camera that was pointed toward the general area, but he just blew me off saying ghosts aren't real, and I was full of it. But he seemed really against it, like possibly he didn't want to know if it was real or not, would rather just pass it off as my imagination. Worst part is it never occurred to me to talk to any of the other managers about to see if they'd be more willing to look at the video until after months had passed and the video was long gone. I know for a fact I saw that door close behind the figure. I just don't know if he'd opened it himself or if someone else opened it and it closed slowly after they walked out. So yeah, never been able to explain that experience at all.